This update explains what makes an effective executive by Peter F. Drucker. In this book, Drucker discusses the question, how should a manager manage themselves to be effective? Before we dive in, please click the subscribe button to stay updated. Drucker was one of the first to realize that the knowledge economy was coming. He first proposed in his writings that the future society is a knowledge-based society, and future management is the management of knowledge workers. Especially in the book, The Effective Executive, Drucker redefined the manager. He proposed that managers are knowledge workers in the organization, and the primary task of managers is to manage themselves, which is now said to be everyone is a manager, and everyone should be their own CEO. You see, although Drucker wrote this book decades ago and used examples from the industrial civilization era, the issues he focused on have a strong humanistic color, transcending time, and are still hot management issues today. For today's managers, how to develop the potential of knowledge workers remains a difficult problem and challenge. Therefore, this book still has significant practical significance in this era. After introducing the basic situation of this book, I will explain in detail from 4 aspects how to become an effective manager. First, why is achieving effectiveness a challenge every manager faces? Second, to be effective, how should managers manage their time? Third, to be effective, how should managers utilize the strengths of their people and tolerate their weaknesses? Fourth, to be effective, how should managers make effective decisions? Part 1. Let's start with the first point. Why is achieving effectiveness a challenge that every manager faces? Drucker points out at the beginning, management writings usually talk about how to manage others, but this book discusses how managers should manage themselves to be effective. It's unreliable to have a manager who is not effective themselves manage others. Why does Drucker see the effectiveness of a manager's work as a big problem? This is about the background of this book's writing. This book was published in 1966. At that time, the American economy was rapidly developing after World War II, a number of large companies were growing, and the number of managers was increasing rapidly. However, these new managers lacked the necessary knowledge and experience. They didn't know what managers should do or how to be good managers, and they were busy all day without being effective. In this context, Drucker first raised the issue of managerial effectiveness, believing it was key to organizational success or failure. If managers are not effective, the organization cannot be effective either. This has become common knowledge today, but it was a great insight at the time. Drucker points out that to be an effective manager, one must first clarify 2 concepts: what being effective means and what a real manager is. Let's talk about what being effective means. In the first half of the 20th century, the industrial sector adhered to Taylor's scientific management, where the focus of a manager's job was to improve the productivity of physical laborers. This type of management function was relatively easy because the productivity of physical laborers was easily measurable, such as how many pairs of shoes or how many clothes were produced per day, which was clear at a glance. But later, the situation changed as knowledge workers became more important in organizations, and their work effectiveness directly determined organizational performance. For knowledge workers, it's clearly impossible to assess them using methods for measuring physical laborers, because their task is not to do existing things correctly but to creatively do the right things to make work effective. How should the labor results of knowledge workers be measured then? Drucker further pointed out that the key to being effective lies in emphasizing contribution, a requirement for both organizations and individuals. An organization is an organ of society. It must contribute to society and provide effective services. Just like businesses must serve customers, hospitals must serve patients, and governments must serve citizens. Similarly, knowledge workers should also emphasize contribution. Since knowledge workers produce knowledge and creativity, to make a contribution, they must make these things useful for others. This means knowledge workers cannot shut themselves away and work in isolation. They must understand others' needs and have the responsibility to make others understand their work. In short, Pursuing effectiveness means emphasizing the contribution of work. Having clarified what being effective means, let's now look at what a real manager is. Drucker points out that a manager is first and foremost a knowledge worker. Their work must contribute to the organization and substantially affect the organization's operational capacity and performance. Conversely, to judge whether a knowledge worker is a manager is not to look at their position level, whether they have subordinates, or even the complexity of their work, but to see whether their work significantly impacts the organization's capacity and performance. If the answer is yes, then even a frontline employee is a manager. For example, in guerrilla warfare, each soldier must make independent judgments about the situation, and the results of their actions will affect the outcome of the entire war. So every soldier in guerrilla warfare is a manager. Similarly, in a company's laboratory, a junior researcher choosing a research route may directly determine the company's future, so they are also a manager. Conversely, a factory foreman, although commanding dozens of workers, is just a supervisor and is not responsible for the work content or method of their subordinates, so the foreman is not a real manager. Clearly, every manager should pursue effectiveness, but achieving effectiveness is not easy. Drucker said that in his 45-year consulting career, he had never met a natural effective manager. Even a manager with high intelligence and knowledge does not necessarily mean they are effective. Sometimes even the opposite is true. Talented people feel capable, but don't understand how to convert their talents into results, and are the least effective. Why is it so hard for managers to achieve effectiveness? Drucker believes that managers are in organizations and, to some extent, are prisoners of the organization. First, a manager's time often belongs to others, not themselves. Their work can be interrupted at any time by subordinates, superiors, customers, partners, etc. Second, managers are often forced to be busy with daily affairs and dealing with emergencies, unable to find time to think about really important issues. Third, the results of a manager's work must be absorbed and utilized by the organization to have an effect, which means managers must spend a lot of time communicating with superiors and people in other departments. Finally, managers tend to focus their attention on the organization itself, thus ignoring the external world the organization serves and being unable to provide effective services and contributions externally. Drucker points out that all managers face these four challenges, which is a fact that managers themselves cannot change. For this reason, every manager must consciously learn how to improve their effectiveness, or they cannot be effective. The good news is that learning to be effective is not that difficult and does not require special talent or abilities. By mastering the right methods and practicing constantly, one can make the pursuit of effectiveness a habit. In short, for managers, effectiveness can be learned and must be learned. That's the first point. Why achieving effectiveness is a challenge every manager faces. Being effective means making work produce real results and emphasizing contribution, not just looking busy on the surface but actually ineffective. However, managers within the organization can easily become prisoners of the organization, tired of daily affairs. They must learn the right methods and, through constant training and practice, hope to be effective. Part 2. Next, I'll explain in detail the three important methods to achieve effectiveness, which are time management, utilizing people's strengths, and effective decision-making. Let's start with the first method. How should managers manage their time to be effective? As mentioned earlier, one of the main challenges managers face is that their time does not belong to themselves and can be squeezed and interrupted by various affairs at any time. Moreover, the higher the manager's position in the organization, the more the organization occupies their time. For example, a general manager usually has to attend various social events, such as entertaining important customers and government officials, attending various public events, etc. In this way, managers spend much time on work that does not contribute much. What's more terrifying is that very few managers realize this. In fact, many people don't know how their time is allocated. For example, one chairman was very sure that his time was 1/3 for discussing business, 1/3 for entertaining customers, and 1/3 for social activities. After hearing this, Drucker had his secretary record this chairman's actual time allocation for the next 6 weeks. It turned out that most of the chairman's time was spent on the company's daily scheduling, such as personally calling to urge the delivery of goods. The important matters he thought he spent time on, such as discussing business, entertaining customers, and attending social activities, didn't take much time at all. That's why Drucker said that as a manager, if you can't know yourself, you should at least know your time. Achieving this isn't difficult. It's about constantly recording your time allocation. It is important to record it immediately while dealing with a particular task and not later by memory, as people's memory is unreliable. After recording the time allocation, the second step is to cut off time-wasting activities boldly. Managers can ask themselves which activities are completely unnecessary, which can be delegated to others, and which activities waste others' time, such as always calling everyone together for meetings. Drucker asserts that every manager who seriously reviews their time records will find a lot of time wasted on such unnecessary activities. These activities, which should be cancelled or delegated, are relatively easy to solve. In addition, there is another kind of time wasting caused by the organization's own management deficiencies. For example, if an organization repeatedly faces the same crisis, the managers will be busy dealing with these crises. In fact, a system can be designed to resolve this kind of crisis before it happens, so the manager won't have to deal with it every day. Drucker summarized this by saying, "If a factory always has a climax and seems to be busy, it must be poorly managed. A well-managed factory is always monotonous and boring, without anything exciting because any possible crisis has long been foreseen, and the solution has become routine work." Time wasted due to poor organizational management includes repetitive crises, overstaffing, frequent meetings, and poor communication. However, even if all the time wasted on these issues is resolved, a manager's time is still quite limited. Especially for senior executives, the time they can use freely generally only accounts for 1/4 of their total working hours. If this 1/4 of working time cannot be concentrated but is fragmented, the result will be disastrous. This is because many important matters have minimum continuous working time requirements, and if each session is less than this minimum, the task will not be done well. The time spent will also be wasted, and next time it will have to start from scratch again. For example, writing an important report requires 7 hours to complete the first draft. If you write for 15 minutes each time and twice a day, 2 weeks later, you will have spent 7 hours but probably have written very little. But if you can lock the door and turn off the phone, concentrate for 7 hours and write continuously, you can produce a good draft. Similarly, if you discuss an important business with a subordinate, it takes at least an hour, and simply talking for 15 minutes won't have an effect. Important personnel decisions require more time. Effective managers are very cautious about personnel decisions, often considering them intensively for hours and weighing them repeatedly before making a final decision. Therefore, the third step of time management is to find ways to bring fragmented time together into whole blocks of work time. There are many specific methods. For example, senior managers can work from home 1 day a week, or concentrate all routine matters in a few days and free up other times. In short, if managers want to achieve greater results, they need longer, whole blocks of time. Finally, for the concentrated blocks of time, managers must use them effectively, focus, and do only one thing at a time, following the first things first principle. However, there are often several first things before a manager, so how should they decide the order of these tasks? Here Drucker offers 2 suggestions. First, don't be busy with yesterday's tasks. Once a job starts, people tend to continue it, even if the job has no value for the future, and people don't want to give it up. This is equivalent to the sunk cost in economics and should be decisively abandoned, and the task should be terminated. At the same time, people have a path dependence on yesterday's success. For example, some companies have achieved great success with a certain product, but this product is no longer suitable for future market demands. In this case, the company should not focus on maintaining this product, but on developing new products. Second, don't determine priorities based on pressure. The most urgent-looking things are not necessarily the most important, while truly important things, such as strategic thinking about the future and turning decisions into actions, do not seem very urgent. If priority is determined according to pressure, these truly important things will be put off. Experienced managers know that putting it off means never doing it. This is the first method to achieve effectiveness to manage time well. First, record your time allocation and cut off those time-wasting and meaningless activities, then find ways to bring fragmented time together into whole blocks of work time, and finally, follow the first things first principle, doing only one thing at a time. Part 3. Next, let's introduce the second method to achieve effectiveness. How should managers use people's strengths and tolerate their weaknesses? Speaking of hiring, managers can easily fall into a trap. They must find someone with all-around ability, even perfect, to fill important positions. For example, many management books say that a senior manager must have extraordinary analytical and decision-making abilities, excellent interpersonal communication skills, be good at mathematics, have artistic accomplishment, be creative, etc. In short, they must be all-round talents. The problem is that such people are very rare. If we're realistic and admit that we can't find such all-around talents, we have two choices left. One is a person whose strengths and weaknesses are equally outstanding, and the other is someone ordinary in all aspects and without major flaws. Which would you choose? Let's look at an example. During the American Civil War, President Lincoln initially chose generals based on the criterion that they must not have major flaws. In contrast, every general in the Southern camp under General Lee was full of flaws, big and small. What was the result? All the flawless generals Lincoln carefully selected were defeated by the generals under Lee, who were full of flaws. Later, Lincoln realized his mistake and, against all odds, appointed General Grant as commander-in-chief. This was an outstanding general with a major flaw: drinking heavily. To this, Lincoln half-jokingly said, "If I knew what wine he liked, I should send him a few barrels and let everyone share." It later proved that Lincoln's hiring decision was correct. After General Grant took office, he won the crucial battle and turned the tide of the Civil War. In fact, human development is inherently unbalanced. The more talented a person is, the more flaws they tend to have. If you only employ people who are well-rounded and flawless, the entire organization will inevitably be mediocre. A good hiring decision is to find those who are outstanding in some way, and make full use of their talents rather than always focusing on their shortcomings. In other words, when hiring, managers should ask more, "What can this person do?" instead of "What can't this person do?" The manager's task is not to change or overcome others' shortcomings, but to help everyone make full use of their talents and achieve personal success. On this, Drucker summarized, "An organization cannot rely on omnipotent geniuses to achieve results, but can only rely on ordinary people with one skill. Only organizations that make ordinary people do extraordinary things are good organizations." An effective manager should not only use the strengths of subordinates, but also learn to manage superiors and use their strengths. Superiors are also human, with flaws and strengths, and as subordinates, you should not always complain about the shortcomings of your superiors, but try to help them utilize their strengths. Fully using the superior's strengths can help you do your job better. For example, if your superior is good at communication, you can take them with you to meet your important customers. Also, if the superior is not competent and does not get promoted, it is difficult for the subordinates to get promoted. Conversely, subordinates of fast-promoting supervisors are the most likely to succeed. So helping your superior is helping yourself. Finally, managers should also fully understand themselves and use their strengths. Some people easily complain about their boss or company when work is not going well. They waste their time and talents on grievances and complaints. In fact, despite various restrictions, if one really wants to do something, they can find ways to use their strengths and achieve results. The most important thing is not to force yourself to do what you're not good at, but to follow your talents and do what you are most interested in and what comes naturally. That's the second method to achieve effectiveness. Use people's strengths. Managers should find those who are outstanding in some way, make full use of their talents, and help them succeed rather than focusing on their shortcomings. Not only should they use the strengths of subordinates, but they should also learn to manage superiors, use their strengths, fully understand their talents, and use their own strengths. Part 4. Next, let's introduce the third method to achieve effectiveness. How should managers make effective decisions? We usually think that a good manager must be busy making decisions every day. Is that true? Actually, no. Drucker said that effective managers do not make many decisions, they only make a few important ones. For managers, the most time-consuming thing is not making decisions but implementing them. If a decision cannot be implemented, it is not a real decision but only a good intention. If a manager is only busy making decisions daily without executing them, that shows that they are ineffective. Therefore, to be an effective decision-maker, you must first ask, do you really need a decision? Making a decision is like performing surgery, which carries some risks. A surgeon won't easily operate on a patient unless absolutely necessary, and similarly, you shouldn't make decisions easily unless a decision is absolutely necessary. Sometimes maintaining the status quo is the best decision. On the other hand, once it's necessary to make a decision, managers must act decisively, make the right decision, and avoid doing only half of it or making compromises. This is like performing tonsillectomy surgery. If it is decided to do it, it should be done thoroughly and completely removed rather than halfway. Drucker emphasized not always thinking about compromises when making decisions. When he was consulting for General Motors in the United States, the chairman and president of GM, Sloan, told him, "My only requirement is to write down what you think is correct. You don't have to worry about our reaction or that we don't agree. Most importantly, you don't have to compromise to make your suggestions easier for us to accept. You must first tell us what is right, and then we can have a right compromise." Drucker said Sloan's words can be every manager's motto when making decisions. In addition to the above-mentioned careful decision-making and decisive action, an effective decision-maker must also establish principled solutions to routine events. This means that for repetitive problems, managers should not just treat the symptoms or be satisfied with temporary solutions, but should seek higher-level solutions and establish a set of principles. For example, if a factory's steam pipe joints always break, the manager should not just have people regularly replace the joints, but study whether the equipment's temperature and pressure are too high, and whether the joint needs to be redesigned. It should be emphasized that, apart from these obvious routine events, some not-so-obvious ones exist. For example, mergers and acquisitions, although accidental for a company, are common in the industry. Similarly, a disaster may be the first time it has occurred, but it's actually the beginning of a series of similar incidents. For such events, managers must also seek solutions at a higher level and establish principled solutions to avoid being in a state of making decisions daily. Decision-makers should note one more thing: there should be more than one alternative when making decisions, and they should judge among two or more conflicting plans. If it's obvious that a plan is good or bad, it's not called a decision. Only when each plan has its advantages and disadvantages and requires in-depth research to judge, is it an effective decision. Experienced managers, if they see everyone unanimously supporting a plan, will not immediately adopt it, but will deliberately provoke opposing opinions and fully consider both sides before making a decision. For example, whenever President Roosevelt of the United States encountered a major event, he always asked several assistants who usually disagreed, "Please study a question, but you must keep it confidential." In this way, Roosevelt could collect various different opinions and look at a problem from multiple angles. It's like a judge handling a case, considering every piece of evidence and listening to both the prosecution and the defense before finding the truth. That's the third method to achieve effectiveness: effective decision-making. Effective managers are not busy making decisions daily but make only a few important ones. When making decisions, They should act decisively, avoid doing only half or compromising blindly, establish principled solutions to routine events, and make effective decisions by judging among multiple conflicting alternatives and fully considering opposing opinions. That's the essence of this book. Here's a brief summary of what was shared. First, achieving effectiveness is a challenge every manager faces. Being effective means making work produce real results and emphasizing contribution, rather than being busy on the surface without actual effectiveness. However, managers within the organization can easily become prisoners of the organization and are tired of daily affairs. They must learn the right methods and, through constant training and practice, hope to be effective. Second, effective managers must learn time management. First, record your time allocation, boldly cut off those time-wasting and meaningless activities, find ways to bring fragmented time together into whole blocks of work time, and finally follow the first things first principle, doing only one thing at a time. Third, effective managers must learn to use people's strengths. Managers should find those who are outstanding in some way, make full use of their talents, and help them succeed rather than focusing on their shortcomings. Not only should they use the strengths of subordinates, but they should also learn to manage superiors, use their strengths, fully understand their talents, and use their own strengths. Fourth, effective managers must learn effective decision-making. Effective managers are not busy making decisions daily but make only a few important ones. When making decisions, they should act decisively, avoid doing only half or compromising blindly, establish principled solutions to routine events, and make effective decisions by judging among multiple conflicting alternatives and fully considering opposing opinions. Finally, let me share my experience reading this book. This book is a management classic that has been popular for half a century. Many of the concepts in the book have become management knowledge that we use daily without realizing it. Nonetheless, this book can still give us new insights because Drucker doesn't just tell us some practical knowledge, but takes us into specific historical backgrounds and management scenarios, deducing conclusions with rigorous analysis and plain language, showing his thought process step by step to the readers. So, reading Drucker's book and remembering some useful conclusions is just the beginning. What's more important is learning his thinking approach, his timeless perspective, and how he makes keen judgments about social trends. As Drucker said in the book, what really matters is not the trend itself but the shift in the trend. We also suggest you read this book, apply the theory you learn in practice, and create more value.